Good evening, everybody. How you guys doing tonight? I want to welcome you back to another episode of Wisconsin Conservative Conversations. As you guys know, we keep having guests on here that are running for statewide office, Wisconsin State Senate offices, the Assembly, your local candidates. We want to talk to everybody, and of course, the purpose of this is to bring forth their message, talk about the issues that are relevant here in Wisconsin, and occasionally we got some return guests that we do like to catch up with and talk about their race, the developments in there, and the importance of them. And one of the races that I think is extremely important that we need to focus in on is the Secretary of State race here. Now, currently, the Secretary of State held by Doug LaFollette, Democrat. He's been in there 40 some years, I believe. And we have three Republican primary challengers. Tonight, we're going to welcome back Jay Schroeder. Jay's been running this race here almost a year now, maybe longer. And I want to welcome Jay Schroeder back here. How are you, sir?
Awesome. 15,000 miles, and I've already totaled one car, so we're well on our way.
And what did you hit?
A deer in Wapaka going 70 miles an hour. The leg's vaporized, and it's shot straight up in the air, just like a cartoon commercial. It was 11:30 at night, and I'm like, should I turn around and get the roadkill or not? And I'm like, no, I'm too tired. I just drove 6 hours. So first time, that's the third deer I've hit, but usually I always take the roadkill, but that night I'm like, the heck.
Well, after all the campaigning and all the time on the road, I can see where like 11:30 at night, that's the last thing on your guys' mind there. But no, you got to be careful, especially Wapaka County. That's a pretty heavily populated area for deer and everything. It's funny because I was telling somebody, it reminds me of the old Battlestar Galactica, the Cylons with the eye going back and forth. I feel like that's me every time I'm driving around here because I'm just below Wapaka.
Yep.
So you're scanning constantly, but that also brings up to the fact that you're white knuckle driving, depending on road conditions. You're constantly scanning. It's a lot of work you guys put in, especially running for these races.
Yep.
Obviously, yours, Secretary of State. How's the campaign trail working for you here, other than obliterating deers?
Awesome. I'm going around the state, and I like to think that I'm more the unique candidate in that I go to Republican events, Lincoln Day dinners, parades. Well, that's no, or I go to the fairs, go into their booths. But I also go to patriot events all around the state, and I would say that I'm the candidate that goes to all of those events because you have to, as a candidate, represent all the issues. And if there's an event, a gubernatorial candidate, I go no matter what, whatever governor's candidate is, gubernatorial candidate. And I go to the patriot groups because they want to be heard, and I go to both. So my message is election integrity. Like I like to say, if a Democrat group invited me, I go talk to them too about elections. So we have to be a broad tent and have the same interest. And that's why I go.
Have you had much success when it comes to dealing with anybody left of center on that particular issue?
Well, the Institute for Responsive Government did a survey, that was back last October. And amazingly, well, the Republicans are in favor of having the Secretary of State in charge of elections. But you know what? The Democrats are as well. Both parties are. So then I'm asked, well, that's nice, Schroeder, you run for Secretary of State. Let's say you win. And this is my answer. And some legislators have asked me that as well. Okay, you win in 4 years. What happens if a Democrat wins? Then are we back to WEC 2.0? And I'm like, well, first of all, if I get elected to Secretary of State, I'd tell the legislature, I only want the duties for the term of office. So at the end of 4 years, the duties expire. That means if I run again or another Republican and they win the general election, they have to go to the legislature and apply for the duties, just like a lot of people do for a job. And a Democrat would too. But the key to this all, and we had talked about it before, the key to it is when you have the majority, you should be in majority rule. In other words, you have a Democrat wins 4 years from now. Well, if we have control of the Assembly and Senate, we set the rules.
Right.
So then we could maybe have the duties put in the Assembly and Senate elections committees instead. And we can't ever go back to what we have now, as we have an election commission. It's got 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats. What brainchild would do that? The state Supreme Court and the US Supreme Court have an odd number for a
Odd
reason.
number.
Because, and it relates to right now, is the state Supreme Court ruled 4-3, you can't have drop boxes.
Right.
So guess what? Our glorious Wisconsin Election Commission has a meeting. And the Republican member, Bob Spindell, bless his heart for what he's put up with. He makes a motion, and imagine this. It is, how can you screw this up? But somehow they managed to. He makes a motion that the state Supreme Court ruling should be explained to all the county clerks.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't that make sense? You know,
But
we have a ruling. The county clerks administer the elections locally. Shouldn't they explain the ruling to the clerks so they know how to handle it with their jurisdiction? Guess what? It's a 3-3 vote, and the motion fails.
And I'm guessing along party lines.
Yeah, no, it's 3-3. So the motion to even let the county clerks know what the state Supreme Court ruling was defeated. So now, based on that, the election commission can't tell them. Or
What would be the purpose to not tell them? I mean, we can speculate. I mean, because it just seems kind of, it's like, okay, here's the television, make it work. Oh, we have to debate whether or not we want to give you the instructions. Nah, we're not going to give you the instructions. What?
Right. Yeah.
That doesn't make sense.
Yeah. For one side, it does. Think about it.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing, you don't want to speculate, but it's like, guys, you're making this look real bad. I mean, really, really bad.
Yeah. And then, you see an article, and Spindell, who's on there, the Republican, he says their objective is to create chaos in the elections.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I guess so. But I would never, even as much as I have witnessed and as much as I have seen through 2,000 mules and whatever, even I'm still surprised at that vote,
Mm-hmm.
So the average person must be thinking, whatever. There's also some data that's being given to me is, when you move the post office, you have to give them a change of address.
Right.
Well, what they've done is they've melded the 2 audits of the post office and the election commission. Well, in 2020, there was 8,000 people that moved out of the state because they notified the post office. But yet, according to Wisconsin election records, they still voted. How about that?
One of the things that did bother me throughout the entirety of 2020 in particular, we had COVID that happened, and this was March, and of course you got the lockdowns here in the state, but they were real bad in other states, and especially some of our neighboring states, Michigan, Illinois in particular. I saw this huge influx of people from northern Illinois up in the central Wisconsin, northern portions of the state here.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw a lot of these folks not go back after the summer. I mean, why would you want to go back to a place that's got draconian lockdowns?
Right.
And I had to wonder how much of an impact did that have on our election? If you're here for X amount of time, I think, what is it, 30 days, you can vote as long as you got a bill here.
Yep.
You have a second home. And I don't want to imply that people were voting in 2 different places, but if you're absentee voting, how exactly does that work? I mean, we've seen
that's called the 2-for-1 sale. You can vote.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah.
Is that like America's going out of business sale or something? Yeah, that's what I feel like.
Yeah.
But going back to the voter rolls, that's been an issue that's been going on for decades, cleaning up the dead off of there, people that have moved. But I think 2020, it just added to the complexity of that because you had people that were either moving to Wisconsin or getting out of Madison, Milwaukee, Fox Valley area to more rural communities where people just they did their thing and that was it.
Yeah.
What kind of impact did you see with that?
Well, the one thing I can relate to with that is I think I've discussed it with maybe not. My father passed away 7 years ago. So
Yes.
I knew that I was his executor. So he gets his Social Security deposit in his checking account. Within 14 days, IRS was reversing the transaction. This is nationwide. They're focusing on my dad in Clintonville, or
Mhm.
yeah, in Nina and Clintonville. So what is there? 320 million. How many are on Social Security? Whatever the statistics are. So
Right.
my question is, why can't you, after the undertaker lets the IRS know, have a database set up with the same process? So within 14 days, you drop off the voting rolls.
Mhm.
How about that for a novel idea? Why can't we do that?
It would make sense. I mean, I guess maybe if you're attaching money to it, perhaps, because yeah, the IRS when they want their money, they're real quick about that.
Yeah, yeah. But I think we could do the same thing with our voting rolls.
Yep.
So,
So here's something that I think is really important because when you look at the Secretary of State as it exists right now, and I think you kind of alluded to that when you were talking about applying for the powers, the duties on each election term.
yep.
Currently, the Secretary of State and the Treasurer have kind of been the target of just trying to eliminate these constitutional positions. And they are constitutional positions within the Wisconsin state constitution,
Mhm.
their executive offices. How would you try to get some of those powers back? Because it was the legislature that essentially stripped it. How do we get those things back, especially with regards to voting integrity, Secretary of State oversight, getting rid of the WEC, things like that? How would you go about doing that?
Well, the good news is all the major candidates running for governor want to get rid of the election commission as well. But
Mhm.
that's the key to my campaign. I'm running crystal clear that I want the duties under the Secretary of State's office. For 125 years, it was under the Secretary of State's office in Wisconsin. The last 40 years, it hasn't been. It's been an absolute disaster. How can any legislator or the legislature say, well, we want to keep continuing this madness? First, it
Right.
was the state election committee, I think it was called. Then it was GAB. Then it was WEC. What are they going to do? Say, well, we want to keep it in unelected bureaucrats? So I don't know how they can historically or rationally say, well, let's keep it in the bureaucrats' hands. I think that thing has been played. That card is dead. You know.
Mhm.
So, uh,
Something you said too, and this was a fear that I keep hearing, was that, well, what happens if a Democrat gets elected to be Secretary of State again? And my thing is, well, what happens if a governor is a Democrat again? I mean, you're always going to run that risk, aren't you? It doesn't matter how you slice that.
right. But somewhat, that's very true. But in private enterprise or whatever anyone does for a living, uh, if you don't do your job, you lose it. If you do your job and you do your job as a Republican, as the legislature, assembly, senate, you'll keep majority. If you screw
Mhm.
up, you'll lose it. So that's part of it. And every Secretary of State has to do a job interview. That's how I see it with the
Right.
legislature. And they always have the power because they have the power to give the duties or take them away. Why can't they have the power for each every 4 years? And I think that
Mhm.
answers it. You can't do that over the governor because they're the top executive. But
Right.
Secretary of State, they're a lower man on the totem pole. So
What do you think the likelihood would be to try to get some of those powers back, especially oversight of Wisconsin state elections, back to the Secretary of State through the legislative process?
based on the history of the last 20 years, and when I talk to assemblymen and state senators, I think it would be very good. You have accountability, and yet it's shifted to an elected position, which they would like. And to
Mhm.
be honest with you, then it's not them. So that's kind of an incentive for them to do it. But there's
Right.
no way that you can argue, well, let's keep the same system we've had. What argument can they say? You know,
Well, I
and
think especially
like I
after the
always like
2020 election, yeah.
like I always like to tell people, if you know the history and remember it, I'm sure you do as well. Bush and Gore in 2000, hanging
Mhm.
chads and all that baloney.
Yep.
You know what? Do you hear any problems in Florida anymore?
You
I don't
really
think
don't.
nobody does. all you have to do, this election is not rocket science. You have to copy what works. You and I've said it before. You have to build up confidence in people's minds about elections. Everything that goes on now, everything we talk about, is taking away from it. How do you do that? Like I like to say, a politician will say election integrity. How many times do you hear that when you go to these events? But you know what?
Everybody's saying it.
Yeah, but they never go beyond that. Election integrity. I bet you could go to a Democratic booth at a fair and say, "Are you for election integrity?" And they'd say yes.
Mhm.
But what does it really mean? You have to get, and I say this around the state, you have to get voting machines without internet access. And they say, well, why would you want that? Well, according to the Durham report, been investigating everything. He
Correct.
said that President Trump's servers were hacked while he was in the White House. Well, the White House is the most secure building in the world. You can hack it
Mhm.
there. You can hack our voting machine.
Right.
That's the world. Then you have to have ballots with watermarks, just like our currency. So you can't
Mhm.
duplicate them. They're original. You have to have chain of custody on a ballot, so you know exactly where it is at all the time. All those things, what am I saying? They're all building up confidence in elections. Because if we
Right.
don't have confidence, you'll have a collapse in our election system and our trust in government. That's what we're going through right now. But we have to build it, not tear it down.
How do we rebuild the confidence in the electorate to say, because there's a lot of people, and I don't necessarily want to get into the weeds of did Trump win, did Trump not win? Because I think you can make a case either way. But I think there's a lot of people that even prior to 2020, nobody cares about my vote. I'm just one person. So why should I bother to vote? And I think since 2016, we've seen a lot of first time voters come on to the scene. 2016, 2018, 2020. I think 2018, for example, one of the reasons we got Evers because we had a lot of first time voters that came in that voted because it was a non binding referendum on the legalization of marijuana.
Exactly. That's what it
So I
was.
think that certainly helped out the Democrat cause at that point. First time voters. How do you build up the confidence, especially for people on the right, considering how shaken they've been from 2020?
Well, one of the things you have to, the scariest thing when I go talk around the state or at a fair or whatever, somebody else comes, my vote doesn't matter anymore. Why should I
Right.
go? That's the scariest thing you hear. And why does your vote count? Like in Portage County, I think they have a new, well, they have a new county executive, and it's like the first time in 50 years or whatever. And
Mhm.
I think the person won by 9 votes, you know?
Yeah.
And every election cycle in Congress, there's some too. There was a lady who won, a Republican. I think she won by 6 votes, a congressional seat. So your vote does count in every election. You almost can reference every time there's something where it does count. But to build up the confidence, it's just like I had said, uh, getting rid of the voting machines, internet access, the paper ballots, chain of custody, all those things build it. And anytime, I'm not a rocket scientist here. I have learned those things, and what I say is watching like the Gableman report, or
Mhm.
people tell me what goes on. A CNA has told me, well, we had nursing homes. You know what the activity director said? Well, the activity today is we're going to be voting. They haul all the residents out in the hallway, and they're giving them ballots. And then some that can't get ballots or vote, they're helped to vote.
Hmm.
So, the moral of the story is you listen to the people and you learn, and then how can we stop that or
Right.
build the confidence? And that's I'm just a sounding board. I don't come up with it.
Mhm.
I don't have some master plan here. I come up with what people have told me and what I hear in the news, and it's fixable. If I didn't think so, I wouldn't be running. And the good people are the majority in this state. I really,
Right.
I do.
And I think, yeah, a lot of good people are coming back out. They have to believe that we have to win this in overwhelming numbers. It's not just enough to say, well, you know what, I'll let those people vote this cycle, whatever. I can't be bothered to do that. And I think that's part of the Republican Party, the conservative movement. That's kind of the job that we have is to energize those people, energize not just the base, but their independent, your moderate left, your moderate right, to get out and vote for these things that are that important. So that
Yeah.
way there's no question as to who won an election, and there's no question as to the integrity of that election. One of the
And
things that go ahead, please.
you have to give them clear path, clear objectives of what you want to do. It reminds me of Newt Gingrich when he had a contract with America. They had
Yes,
10 things. You vote for us, we're going to do these things. And what was it? They took over Congress and they hadn't had it in 40 or 50 years.
that is correct.
And so you have to have a clear message too. You can't, I've referenced before, you can't say I'm for election integrity. What the heck's a voter going to say? What is that? Like I try to explain everywhere I go, uh, it needs to be under the Secretary of State's office. It was there for 125 years. The founding fathers set it up that way, and we have to have accountability. And I have to give them a reason to vote for me, and it's
Mhm.
something different too. Doug LaFollette, he's been in there. He's milking it. He knows
Right.
that. The ironic thing with him is he was whining and complaining he couldn't get nomination signatures because of the pandemic. Oh, so, I got to help. I got to have help people. I'm not going to make it. So what does he do? He gets these signatures. What was it, like 3,000 or whatever? You know what he does? The first thing he does, he goes on a plane to Africa for 3 weeks. You
Oh,
know, how in your face can you be? So, and I tell the story. I went to the Secretary of State's office. It's in the basement. You go there,
nice.
the door's
Right.
locked. They have plastic over it. You have a little space to talk. And is Mr. LaFollette in? This was last fall. Oh no, he's on vacation. Was he coming in next week? Well, we don't know. Because of the pandemic, he works remotely. The office, if you saw my Facebook post, the office
I
was full of
remember.
papers and everything all over the place. So he's almost like in your face to the electorate. It's like, hey, this is my job. I don't have to do anything, and don't tell me I have to. It's that brazen. So
Well, and of course, nobody really checks on it because how many people are really looking into what the Secretary of State really does?
yeah. And I'm
It's
not just running just for the heck of it here. I actually want to do this, and like
mhm.
I said, I have a vested interest. My dad was one of the 625,000 people that are deceased on the voting rolls. And
Right.
I talk around the state and tell that story. 5 people have came up to me. They typed in the information on their cell phone and said, "We found our deceased relative as well." You know,
Mhm.
so that's what fires me up to do it. Plus,
When I think that was something too, yeah, that my voter, what
yeah,
is it? Myvote.com, myvoter.com.
yeah,
And several people have pointed that out, that they had deceased family members that are shown to have voted when they had died years prior.
yeah. And a reporter said to me, "Well, that's just the first step of registering." And I'm like, "Okay, wait a minute. You have this website. If you type in the name and the date of birth, why would it pop up on the website in the middle of the page with a red icon, register to vote? Why
Mhm.
would it pop up at all? Or I guess you could make a smiley face. I'm sorry, this person is deceased.
Right.
Whatever. But they don't, so I don't know.
Um,
All this stuff, and I just can't believe it. It's like a movie that doesn't end, and it's like, who can write this script?
well, I've told people the last few years in particular, it's like if you were to take the movie Idiocracy, Beer Fest, throw in a couple dystopian movies and a really crappy script, and you've got literally the last 2.5 years here.
Yeah.
Um, it's a comedy, it's a tragedy. We don't know what's going on half the time, but we're hoping to fix that because it's my belief that we are literally on the cusp of a red wave. Like this is our election to lose. And one of the things that I'm hoping to bring forward with these conversations with you. And by the way, I want to thank you because I know we've had a hard time coordinating our schedules. But also every time we've gotten together, you and I have just met, we just talk and go over different things. And I really, really appreciate that. I appreciate your friendship and everything. So I want to make sure I tell you that. But something you have on your website, I think there's two things, because I think everyone, when they talk about Secretary of State, election integrity, okay, cool, we got that. But you have two lesser things on here that I think are really important to zero in on. You're talking about relocating the Secretary of State out of Dane County, which I think is huge. And I
Yes.
think going to the point of election integrity, cleaning up the voter rolls. You've talked about this, bringing the Secretary of State office into the 21st century.
Well, that's part of the cabal. See, if you
Mhm.
analyze, they keep it. First of all, the Wisconsin Election Commission does something, whatever. They get sued. They're getting sued all the time. Bob Spindell says they get a lawsuit almost every day.
Yeah.
But part of the cabal is you keep it in Dane County for a reason, because you have the liberal judges that do the cover. So that's the most important thing. You got to take it out of Dane County. So if anyone has a problem with the Secretary of State's office, and as far as that goes, other state offices, you
Mhm.
can get into a county where actually they will serve justice
Right.
versus cover up justice or ignore justice. So that is so important, not only the secretary, but other departments too.
I think what happens is when you have centralized power like that, there's almost this echo chamber. And I don't want to speak, and I realize I'm speaking generally about this because I know we got good senators, I know we got good assemblymen, and then there's other people that's questionable. But I think some people, they get stuck in their echo chamber and they don't necessarily understand what's going on with the rest of the state. What are the issues that are most important to that state?
That's right.
I think when you have the Secretary of State office there, right in the middle of Dane County, how can they really know what's going on elsewhere if all they do is hang out in Dane County?
Exactly. It's an echo chamber, round and round, and like Lee Dreyfus used to say, "What is Madison? 43 miles surrounded by reality." I think that was his quote. So nothing's changed, but that is such a key to cleaning it up, and hardly anybody talks about that, getting those offices out of there. But it's
Mhm.
so important, such an important thing if you analyze it and think about it, because the judges are in on it, the liberal judges in Dane County.
Right.
That's just the blunt truth. You know.
When I've even heard this, Mark Belling, who recently had just endorsed you, I think last week there with your candidacy here, but he had an article. I want to say it was sometime late last year, where he talked about how RPW, Republican Party of Wisconsin, needs to get themselves out of the Madison area as well too, and get themselves out into another part of the state, because there's more to Wisconsin than just, say, Dane County, the wild counties, Milwaukee. And it's funny, my wife and I were talking about this. If we had this conversation, say, 10 years ago, I'd probably be no different than anybody else, because prior to moving out to rural Wisconsin, I didn't think there was anything outside of 30 miles of the Milwaukee radius.
Yeah.
But it's
Well,
amazing when you go out, it changes your perspective.
how come the Democratic Party doesn't have their office in Waukesha?
Because they're smart.
Yeah.
But
We
I
got
think
audio
go
behind
ahead.
here. My audio is behind yours, so it's hard to.
Yeah, we had a stall here for a second.
Oh, all right.
But their offices they're located elsewhere.
Yeah.
So in doing that, how would you see that, you're talking about counties, but those judges also get elected too. I guess what would be the ideal for moving the Secretary of State out of the Dane County area?
The ideal area.
Yeah.
How about in the central part of Wisconsin? That's so everyone has equal a chance to go to the office, check up on the Secretary of State, or if they have an issue with elections, to drive there. It's
Hmm.
easier that way. So that's you know that it seems to make sense to me. Or
Right.
I guess you could look at it another way if you follow up on my definition. As best as possible, you would go to an area that has a purple county.
Yeah.
equal number of Republicans and Democrats. And why was that? Why would that be? Because if you have a concern, the judges would be 50-50, I guess, a ruling. I guess maybe that is, you know. Well, right now, for crying out loud, we have the People's Republic of Dane County.
Hmm.
What do you expect? They're, one thing I'll say about them, they're consistent, but they're not representing the 7 million residents of Wisconsin. I can tell you that.
Right. Well, again, I think that goes back to the point that when you're in that Dane County area, you tend to believe that there is a lot more. You think that everything is Dane County. Nothing else really exists outside of that. And then whatever Dane County values are those values that should be extrapolated elsewhere throughout the state,
Yes.
not knowing that there's different parts of the state that have different values, different cultures. I mean, it's amazing. One state can have so many different things there.
Yes. There's 72 counties in Wisconsin, and any guy running for state office, any candidate would tell you this. If you go to different counties in Wisconsin, they will have a more focused on whatever the top issues by that
Hmm.
county. And it's kind of fascinating, whether it's Second Amendment, pro-life, election integrity, supporting certain candidate like myself
Right.
or a governor's candidate. You can have that in one county. Okay, they're gonna like, we want this candidate, and the next county over, they don't. And I'm like, because you see that at Lincoln Day dinners or whatever, and
Hmm.
it is kind of fascinating to tell you the truth. It's like, okay, what do they have? They have groupthink in counties even, or they all talk to each other and it's like, okay, this is our choice. And
Right.
then the next county, it'll be something totally different. It's really kind of neat. They're fascinating.
Well,
And
and that's where, yeah, I think, there's a lot of consensus building, but then there's like, okay, my issue in this part of the state is going to be, like you said, 2A.
yeah,
For another county, it might be more along the lines of the election. Another group might be, that are heavily focused on CRT, or they might just be focused on higher education if they were in a county with a UW system in it.
yeah.
So it is really fascinating watching that. And I would imagine that in all the places that you've been, the Patriot events, the uh, county party events, the GOP events, you've had to have a number of questions thrown at you. What are some of the more unique ones, especially for the Secretary of State?
Well, they ask what the duties are. One of the things I thought I took it as a compliment. There's
Mhm.
one lady, she came up to me and she said, "Well, you're Jay Schroeder." And I said, "Yes." And she says, "You're running on cleaning up the elections, aren't you?" And she says, "You're consistent. It's almost nauseating how consistent." And I thought, well, then I'm doing the right thing because I said, that is the issue. But the other thing is, no one talks about, and it's a dirty little secret. First of all, I got to reiterate, I'm the only candidate that goes to both support groups or both, um, I'd say that, Republicans and patriot groups. I go to
Mhm.
both. And my opponents, they either focus on one or the other. But
Right.
anyway, having said that, but I can't reiterate that enough. And I'm like, well, whatever. Keep doing that because that's going to help me because I'm, seeing both and they both have a lot to offer too. Patriot groups are salt of the earth, just good people.
Mhm.
You talk with them, they just love our country. They love our
Right.
state and they're really neat people. But anyway, the Secretary of State has another duty. They are on the Board of Public Lands,
That's
the
correct.
Attorney General and the State Treasurer. And the candidates talk about it. There's 77,000 acres and they have $1.2 billion in assets. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to analyze this. So what I do is I look at their minutes. And in 20, now granted, just remember they have 77,000 acres and they're responsible for 1.2 billion in assets.
Wow.
So in 2022, I look at their meeting minutes. So you think, wow, all this, they're going to have a lot to do, or they're going to be really involved, our elected officials. Their average meeting, how long it lasts?
I'm gonna go 15 to 30 minutes.
No, 6 minutes.
Really?
So what do you think's going on there? who's running that show? Is it the elected officials,
No.
or is it appointed bureaucrats? Oh, really? Let's see. Where did I remember hearing about elected bureaucrats? Oh, I think it was WEC.
Yeah.
So who's running that popcorn stand too?
Well, that's interesting. If the average meeting is 6 minutes, then what's the purpose of even having a meeting?
Because they are statutorily required to. You
Oh,
can't
I
even get a
get.
chair warm in 6 minutes,
Oh, that's what I'm saying.
Ed.
I mean, and you're talking, what did you say, 77 billion acres? Or am I
77,000 acres and the assets
77,000
are
acres?
1.2 billion. Yes.
Yeah. That's a lot of responsibility. I mean, and when you think about that, that's land that you guys can authorize to sell. Is
Yeah.
that not correct?
Or determine what is the highest and best use of the real estate, which is gets
Right.
back to my real estate background. That's all they ever hammered when I got my degree. Highest and best use. Now, are we
Mhm.
getting the most out of our money for that? It's supposed to be taxpayers' dollars, 1.2 billion, 77,000 acres. And I don't want to be criticized. Oh, you're going to be for whatever. No, the point is are we getting the highest and best use out of it? Are the taxpayers being served by how that is operated? Now,
Right.
it seems to me an elected official would probably be more attuned to looking out for the taxpayers than the bureaucracy.
Mhm.
But that six
When I
minutes blew my mind.
when I think about a bureaucrat, what does the bureaucrat generally do? Their job is to either ensure their job or to validate their existence.
Yeah,
It's a cold reality. I know people, that are. I'm sure there's a lot of good people that work as bureaucrats in government agencies, and I'm sure they're good people. Uh, but I've worked in government before. And Marine Corps is no different. And you see the civilian employees, and everybody does what they can to validate their existence, so that way their job, their position doesn't get cut. It's
right.
no different. I think when you put that in the hands of elected officials, you literally have to work for the people, and that's. I'm trying to figure out what exactly. And I get conservation, but what's Wisconsin doing in the business of having 77,000 acres of land?
Well, they use it. They sell lumber, and then they grant low interest rates to communities. They give the return on the investment to libraries. So I don't want to be accused that I'm against libraries and whatever. You can hear all that.
Mhm.
Somebody will latch onto it.
Oh,
My
of course.
point is, are we getting the best return, the ROI, as a business person would look at it?
Right.
Return on investment, and is it being run in a fiduciary responsibility? And
Ooh,
yeah, how
it's a
about that?
big one right there.
Yeah, I had to think about that word and pronounce it right.
Well, don't ask me to spell it, but I think it's important that you brought that up because I don't think a lot of people quite understand what that means. That it is a duty to get, like you said, the best return on your investment to fulfill the duties of that office. And failing that is one of the reasons why people lose their offices. So I think that's a very important point that you brought up there.
Yes.
Now, just recently, you were endorsing. Obviously, there's a lot of people going around endorsing candidates and everything, but Mark Belling,
Mhm.
um, he's been kind of on this tirade least recently, giving out endorsements, and yours was one of the ones that just came about here last week.
Yeah, I was at home, and I got two texts and like, "Hey, Belling's going to be talking about the Secretary of State's race." So I jumped on the computer to listen. I had no idea what he was going to say,
Mhm.
and I didn't know if I could bring it up tonight because of your podcast. But
No, by
you,
all means.
I'm glad. I was going to ask you before we went online here, but I'm glad you brought it up. I don't think he doesn't do it too often. But what he said is, I'm just going to say, you want somebody that's going to clean up elections. He said, I think Jay Schroeder's your guy. And then he also said, which I related to, and also, my opponent is on the budget committee. This is the
Mhm.
most important thing. She voted to create WEC as well, Wisconsin Election Commission. Which you could say, well, other ones did too. And my answer to that is, yeah, but they're not running for Secretary of State, are they? But one of the most important things in all of that comparison, which he brought up, is my opponent is on the budget committee
Right.
for the state of Wisconsin. Okay, so we have the 2020 election. We have all these things going on, drop boxes, ignoring state statutes, special voting deputies, they waive that, all the things that we've discussed. Wisconsin Election Commission requested $10 million in the state budget. Now, it seems to me, and Belling didn't go into this, but it seems to me if you're worried about election integrity and you knew there was the problems, why would you feed the beast more?
Right.
With $10 million. Why would you do that?
Did they state what they wanted that $10 million for?
Well, you and I both know what for.
Yeah.
It's to feed the beast and keep the interpretations going, just like the state Supreme Court ruled 4-3, and then the election commission meets and it's like, well, we're not going to tell the clerks what the ruling was. It's to keep that going. But and Belling said that. Why would you want somebody running the elections that was part of the crap that created it to begin with?
Mm-hmm.
It is a good question. And that's not negative campaigning. That's a statement of facts. So where were you when there was drop boxes? Where were you when the special voting deputies were waived? Where were you? But now all of a sudden you think it's a big thing, or you want to be in that office.
Right.
So I am confused on that too. Why would you, or where were you? But the biggest thing is the budget. Giving them $10 million more when you sat on that committee. And I think that's what he was looking at. And I'm an outsider, and I'm sure he's looked at my website, and you've mentioned it too. I come across as a guy that actually wants to solve a problem,
Right.
not talk about it. And it relates to, like I had said, in election integrity. What the heck does that mean? Everybody says it. But at least I think I try to carry it through. And I think that was part of it, why he endorsed me and said, but I was happy about it. The ironic thing he said is, if Jay Schroeder is listening to this, I suppose he's probably jumping up and down. And the funny thing is, when I was 5 or 6 years old, when I was a little kid, when I got excited, I'd jump up and down.
Right. Well, it's kind of 50 years late, but it's all good.
Yeah. But it
So
meant
with
a
that,
lot. And it was a good analysis.
oh, go ahead.
I just thought it was a good analysis, and he said it more succinctly than I could have. And I don't know him. He doesn't know me. I've never talked to him on the phone ever. So.
Right. So with that Belly endorsement, have you noticed any momentum, any pickup in people coming to your website, getting more recognition? How's that played out for you so far?
There's people that have contacted me. They want to do digital ads for me. Just tonight, before I talk with you, I was talking to somebody. They're contacting me. People have said, wow. And one lady said, I was never really a fan of yours. She texted me that, and she said, after what he said, and I looked, and you're willing to say sometimes what others won't say. She says, you know what? I changed my mind on you. But she says, I wasn't a fan of you a week ago. Like you've told me, I'm not for everyone.
Right. And that's the thing. It's like, yeah, if you're not a fan of me because of personality, totally get it. But if you're listening to what's being said, that might change your opinion. And it's interesting. It depends on the vector too. Maybe Belling was the one that kind of got her over the top and say, okay, this isn't about personality. This is business. Big difference.
Yeah. And if that's why, anybody that's in business, we kind of all think alike, we try to get rid of the gray areas. It's black and white. It's to make a decision.
Right.
And I ran for assembly, the person I ran for, she's in the assembly running for state senate now. She's endorsed me in my race, so here's a person I ran against, but now she supports me. And she says, when you first meet Jay Schroeder, he's a little rough or blunt, but she said, he kind of grows on you after a while. And I kind of laughed. I'm like, yeah. So.
I don't know. I think to me, that's one of the things I kind of liked about you the first time I met you. I mean, I think we first met, um, we first talked on the phone, then we did an interview, and then we met at a couple of the different events and stuff. And yeah, but then again, I also like that direct approach, because that way there's no question about where you stand on a particular issue.
Oh,
But I think more importantly, there's no question about whether or not I mean, you're going to sit there, you're going to weigh, you're going to measure, but you're going to make a decision relatively quick. And I
absolutely.
think in government's designed to be slow, but I believe at the same time, we want decisions to be made not at breakneck speed, but we shouldn't have to wait 3, 4 months either.
Right. There and the public, and when I talk to them, when I give a speech, the most consistent word I ever see after I talk to the people, shake their hands, and say, "You are really genuine and what you believe in, and you're passionate." That's the word that I hear the most.
Hmm.
Any word, and I'm like, "Yeah, I hope that comes across." It's not made up BS as a politician,
Right.
and it's from the heart, and I'm passionate about it. And we've had enough of this song and dance BS from politicians. They're sick of it. They have a lower approval rating than garbage men or whatever politicians. People are sick of it. They're sick of being the song and dance or lied to or a combination of both.
Right.
And I don't think I come across that way. So
Something you mentioned earlier, and you had talked about how you go to these different events that are, say, Republican GOP focused and Patriot Group focused. What have been some of the commonalities? Because I think we've seen, if you pay attention to, which I recommend most people don't, if you pay attention to a lot of the supporters on both sides, there's a lot of mudslinging back and forth, and it can be like mind numbing. But there's a lot of people that have genuine concerns. Has there been shared concerns within both groups that's not mudslinging, that actually is things that, hey, we need to get this fixed, we share this as a common concern amongst both groups?
amazingly, in some areas, there's friction between the Patriots and the Republican organizations. And, someone I really can't figure it out, to tell you the truth, but there is.
Mhm.
And well, some of them will march to the party dictate, and a patriot won't. And one of the things I was struck at when I was in the western part of the state, Ron Johnson said, "You know what? I started out with the Tea Party movement," and he said, "I'm a Tea Party person before a Republican."
Right.
And I heard him say that, and I was like, "Wow, he's." And I know his history. He's from Winnebago County. I knew him before
Yes,
he
he
was in the
is.
Senate. That's where I live, Winnebago County. He's the same man that he was before he was elected. When he'd come to a Republican event once in a while, not too often. Before he
Mhm.
ran, he's the same person now. But he knows you have to appeal to broader. But he's right.
Yeah.
That's what I say too. I'm either the Patriot or Tea Party conservative, then I'm a Republican.
Mhm.
Because of that, when they do something wrong, like the Republican Party was in the majority when they set up the election commission 3-3, why? Whose brainchild was that? Why
Right.
did you ever do that? So I'm critical of that, but some I get blowback from that for saying it. That
Mhm.
Jay, you shouldn't say that. And I'm like, why? Why shouldn't I say that?
But it's bad. It would be wrong of me not to say that.
Yeah, well, they say, "Well, it makes us look bad." I've heard that. I'm like,
You don't need my help for that. You got that.
"Yeah, yeah, you're good flying solo on that one alone." Yeah, so
That's just always, it's always funny when someone does that. You're making us look bad. No, no, no. You didn't need my help. You did that all on your own.
yeah,
I'm just stating the obvious. But that's a great point. I mean, there's obviously the 3-3 thing don't make any sense. Why not an odd number, which would be, you wouldn't have to worry about ties or anything else like that.
yeah.
Um, but to the point
Well,
of the different groups, yeah, there's definitely a friction amongst them. But I have to wonder, what are there any commonalities? Because one group is always yelling establishment, the other one is like, it's like watching somebody trying so hard to be what they don't want to be. And it's like, do we have the same shared goal, or are these two different concerns?
It's an interesting question. Um, Ideally, or they should have the same goals. It's like when Scott Walker was running in 2010. He went to Tea Party things.
Mhm.
But Ron Johnson was full Tea Party. He wouldn't give speeches, and you know the thing. If you see any of the events, then he has this 3D thing. If you've seen it,
Don't
uh,
think I have.
yeah, with his campaign, that was taken at a Tea Party speech that he gave that I was at, and I saw the picture, and they've kept it. So he's very unique that he knows, and that's why his secret is. And some of these politicians, to be honest with you, they can't figure that out.
Mhm.
But that's why he appeals to everyone. He does, and no, there and some of the people running for statewide office, I'm telling you, they think they have to go down that one path, that one trail,
Right.
and if they go down the other one, oh, they're going to alienate the first path.
Mhm.
Ron Johnson doesn't think that way, and Moore should just step back and watch him because I've seen him. I've been at a patriot group where there are some that would say things that maybe I wouldn't agree with, that would
Mhm.
be a little off the mainstream.
Right.
And by gall, Ron Johnson is standing in the audience. And when that person's done, he goes up and he does his presentation. He doesn't let it affect him. He doesn't, worry, oh, there might be a picture taken a side angle of me with this individual and whatever. He's like, they have their right. And I've seen it.
Right.
And I have what I'm going to talk about in the state, in the federal government, and he makes his presentation.
Mm.
That's the template, and that's why he's successful. You know,
And I think that's important, yeah, so that way you can get that crossover appeal, because that's why I asked the question, because when not only it's not only just a matter of getting crossover appeal from both the GOP and the independents and of course the patriot groups, but also to hear the concerns, because I got to think that there's got to be shared concerns across the board on a number of issues, depending on your particular race, whether you're state senator or secretary of state. Obviously, I think, a lot of people have been yelling in election integrity. Some people have just been using it as a word. I think I like the way you really defined it tonight, because it's not just saying it. It's like, okay, here's the plan: clean up the voter rolls, move it into the 21st century, find a way to have, voting machines without internet connection. Funny thing, military, some of their weapon systems aren't connected to an internet or an intranet. They still
right.
use the old floppy drives,
Yes, they do.
which is
So
amazing.
that's the way to build confidence. Like I said, it all gets to that. And if you don't, you have the continuing problems of what we have, or it gets worse. And that's a danger to our way of life and our democracy. If
Mhm.
you allow that cancer to keep spreading, or virus or whatever, that's a famous word to use now, a virus. But
Right.
you have to build it. And I've talked to reporters, some of the liberal New York Times, Washington Post, whatever, and they always try to harp on me, and I'm like, my answer is always the same. Look, everyone's doing now is taking away trust in elections. We have to
Mhm.
build confidence, and that's what's missing. And we have to take every argument away. It's conflict resolution.
Yes.
If somebody has a problem, whatever it is, doesn't matter. Your objective to solve conflict resolution, take away their argument. So the voting machines are a problem. Take away the argument. So high tech printing, they're duplicating a ballot so they can harvest and go on voting rolls or go to the cemeteries, whatever. Okay, then put watermarks on the ballot.
Mhm.
Every argument that every group brings up, if I was Secretary of State, I would use it as a challenge. Like, okay, here's their objection. Conflict resolution. What are we going to do to get rid of that objection? And
Right.
every time we knock one of those off, confidence will go up.
Right.
So they're going to give me my job description by them poking holes in what's going on. And then the response is, okay, this is how we're going to fix it. So I think in one of the things, it'd be interesting and fun to do that.
Well, I think that's the key to any, conflict resolution, problem resolution is identifying the problem, find out what the obstacles are, and okay, do you just admit defeat and not even try? Or do you say, okay, let's put our heads together. This is what we're being paid for.
Yeah,
Let's have at it.
right. So that way it'd be fun and interesting to actually do the job, to tell you the truth, to each
Well,
one.
we got about 3 weeks now. Actually 3 weeks, one day before the primary here,
Yes.
and then on to the general. Now,
Yeah.
something I didn't say earlier, but obviously you guys see that right there on the bottom of the screen. They got Jay's website there, schroederforsecretaryofstate.com. Make sure you check that out if you want to volunteer, donate, find out more about Jay, the issues he's got going here. Check in with him and see how the campaign is. All the information is going to be right there. So make sure you check that out. I always like to make sure we get the websites plugged in there.
Yep. Awesome.
So I'm going to give you the last few minutes here because we're going to keep it right to about an hour. We're about 55 minutes, but I'm going to give you the last few minutes as we did the last time. Let you have the last few minutes before we check out.
Sure. When I'm done talking, usually at night, I always say to the audience who I'm talking about, before you go to sleep at night, think: is this the state and the country that you grew up in?
Right.
And who is trying to their best to offer a solution to get us out of the mess? Who's presenting the facts? Who's presenting the problem? And who's trying to do the solution? And I'd like to think that I'm trying to be a messenger, first of all, identifying the problems, who's doing it, and what's the solution. So that I want people to think about that and say, are we going to do the same thing over and over again? That's the definition of insanity. Or is this a guy that maybe has a new mousetrap of getting things done? And I'd like to think that I am trying to do that to the best of my ability. And I'm not a rocket science on elections, but I know when there's a problem, like I had mentioned, we have to work at solving it, because if we do, it'll be a better state and a state we grew up in. There's nothing with voter suppression here that I'm talking about.
Right.
It's to build confidence in elections, and we can all do that. But you have to think when you crash for the night: is there a guy that's trying to do this, or is it the same old, same old? And I would hope that people would think of that, like, hey, this guy, um, he's trying to do these things. And because of that, we've had 40 years of this mess. Why don't we try a new path once to see, is there actually another path, and that we can work together? And one thing I'll say at the end is, I'm trying to be a uniter,
Mhm.
because I'm the only one that goes to the Patriot and Republican events, any of them. And so that is a uniting message. And the Patriots and the Republican Party both have a goal, I believe, in cleaning up our elections. Some want it maybe faster than others, and some want to insert bureaucracy that might be a hindrance. But I'm the uniter candidate in
Mhm.
this race, and I think that I'll give it my all. And I like to tell people, you remember Act 10, there was 100,000 people at the Capitol?
Oh yeah.
If you know Schroeder's doing a good job as Secretary of State, maybe there'll be 30,000 at the Capitol protesting on how I want to clean up the elections, and based on the three or four things I told. And anyone else have any ideas on my website, or when you see me, tell me. And if is these talks that I give and this information that I said at the state convention,
The people.
things I read.
Mhm.
So I'm the messenger, not the.
It's an interesting take because I think there's a lot of people that they're coming across that playing the classics.
Yeah, that's right.
And so, well, Jay, thank you connect, get this going, especially now that we've gotten this far into the 3 weeks, So got to wish you luck on that. I know you got two primary up to the ballot box come August 9th.
Yep. You're doing a job. That's what we need as candidates. I'm only one person. I can vote for myself, but I'm not going to win. Volunteers and you podcast as yourselves are what give us so thanks for what you do.
No, thank you. Well, we'll definitely be putting this out on YouTube tomorrow. Putting out all of the social media platforms, MeWe, Facebook, Twitter, and on the audio only as well too. So, Jay, again, thank you very much. Good night.
Awesome.
Especially if you make it past August 9th.
Yep, I ask everyone for their vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Jay Schroeder, great conversation with him as always. Love to have him on. Always make sure you guys go up, talk to him. You'll find that he's a very approachable person and ask him the questions that you have concerns about because you'll find that he'll want to actually engage with you. So, on that note, guys, we'll have other shows coming up here this week. I don't think we're doing the Caramel Conservative podcast tomorrow. I'm going to be in Green Lake County tomorrow night. But you guys make sure you check out all the other episodes we got coming up here. Wednesday night, we're doing a live here with Stephanie Suchek from Door County and Brian Shimming. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. So good night. God bless you. God bless the great state of Wisconsin. God bless America. I'm out.